We're on?
We're on.
We're on, okay. When I first went to college in 1853, or thereabouts, it was assumed that we were all illiterate, which wasn't too far from the truth, and therefore we all had to take an English composition course, and we had a required history course to learn about the world. The course was conducted by the professor reading from his book. I guess assuming we couldn't read, so he read from his book. I'll never forget, it was Edgar Johnson. And he read about the God of the Hebrews, the God of vengeance and punishment and storming from the sky to kill his enemies. And then the subsequent religion of Christianity was a religion of love and support and companionship and all the rest. He omitted, as many people omit, the fact that the biblical verse, should love your friend as yourself, is in the Hebrew Bible. Christians didn't invent that. They took it from us. And somehow, somewhere, the words got transformed into love your neighbor as yourself. That has absolutely nothing to do with the Hebrew. The fact that you share a common wall is not the reason why you should love somebody, or that he dwells down the block. That's not it. The word in Hebrew is re'ah. The word for neighbor is shachin in Hebrew. And something we mentioned last week, when the Talmud says, that which is hateful to you, don't do to your chaver. Chaver certainly means friend. Rashi on the spot quotes the verse from Proverbs, Re'acha v're'a avicha al ta'azov, the re'ah, your re'ah, and the re'ah of your father don't abandon. Rashi is telling you that re'ah and chaver are roughly synonymous. So the command is to love your friend as yourself. Now there's a gigantic literature on this subject. A lot of it, as you may imagine, dealing with the question, is it possible to love another person as much as you love yourself? As here is almost blank in terms of its content, as in what respect? You might naturally assume one aspect of that comparison is as much as. And that's a whole literature which I'm not going to even go into at all today. Rav Dessler has an understanding of this verse which, to my mind, is extremely essential. It's philosophically challenging, and he writes an essay about the challenge. He says you should love your friend with your self-love. As meaning, use that very impulse, that very characteristic of self-love, and use that to love your friend. Now, you hear those words and you think, well, if you need a candidate for an oxymoron, that's it. You are you and he's he. And self-love is directed towards you. And he's not you, he's somebody else. So what do you mean, love somebody else with your self-love? Let me try to explain to you what Rav Dessler means. And we should stop and discuss it when I finish the explanation. And then I'll talk about Rav Dessler's suggestions as how you actually achieve this. First of all, let me give you some parables or stories so as to illustrate the idea that may communicate the basic concept before I come to a definition. Yeshivat Salanter, the founder of the Mussar movement, was returning to his home on a train, and sitting across from him in the train was a young Jewish man. And of course, many of our scholars dressed like everybody else. He didn't wear a sign saying he was one of the nation's leaders of the time. And the other young Jewish gentleman was extremely irritating and disrespectful, as he thought, to a fellow traveler, but that's the way he behaved. When Yisrael Salanter got off the train at his stop, this other fellow got off also. So Yisrael Salanter said to one of his followers, follow him and find out what he's doing here. And he came back with a report. He's from a small town somewhere else, and he came here to be tested on the laws of shechita, ritual slaughter, so that he could become a slaughterer of kosher meat. So Yisrael Salanter said, keep track of him and see what happens. And when he took the test, he failed it. Yisrael said, bring him to me. Came in, and Yisrael said, I understand you are here to be tested for slaughter and competency, and I see that you were not successful. I'll make an offer to you. Come live in my house, and I'll teach you the laws so that you can pass. I don't want any compensation from you. Just live with me. Well, he had no other resources. He had no other alternatives, so he took him up on it. However long it was, several months, he taught him the laws, and he took the test, and then he passed the test. As he came to take his leave, he said to Yisrael, you know, I remember you from the train, and I remember how I behaved to you in the train. Why is it that you took such care of me? Why is it that you were so kind to me? So Yisrael Salanter said, when people do something that's irritating to me, it's my policy to make sure that I'm not angry at them, that I don't hate them, I don't feel aggressively towards them. That's my policy. But it's very difficult when you're judging yourself to know whether you succeeded or not. And I knew that if I teach you, then when you retake the exam, I want you to succeed because I taught you. And knowing that I will now be on your side, I'll be wishing that you should succeed and have some kind of advancement. In that way, I could help guarantee that I didn't harbor you any ill feeling. Well, that means that because Yisrael Salanter invested in him, he sees himself in him. He identifies with him because he now is part of what he cares about in the world. He's not a stranger. That's an illustration of loving someone by investing yourself in him. Now I'll give you another example. Someday you will be married and you'll have children. I hope you take that as a blessing. If you take it as a curse, you have a lot to learn. And you'll have a child, let's say a 6-year-old, who's participating in the class play. And your child has a speaking part. You're sitting there in the audience, and then it's turn for your child to speak. And your child stands there and forgot his or her lines. And is silent. And the teacher says, and the child says, the teacher says, come to the field and join the battle. Oh, the child says, come to the field and join the battle, and then it goes on, right? How does the child feel? I don't know. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. The teacher told me what to say, so I said it. How do you feel? You're dying. You're dying. Your stomach is in your shoes. Will he remember? Will he not remember? He didn't remember? Now, trust me, no one is going to record this, and when he's going to get married at age 20, he will say, oh, when you were 5, you forgot your lines. We don't want to marry you. There's nothing really serious going on here, but it's your child. If it's been somebody else's child, you would have sat there calmly without any emotion at all. But because it's your child, the child that you've invested in, therefore you want to see that child succeed. When the child is having a moment of failure, you feel that, and you experience that. Because you've invested in the child. I'll give you one more case. Imagine someone whom you love. You're walking down the street with someone whom you love. And some stranger comes up to this person whom you love and starts saying insulting and nasty and aggressive things and threatening things. And you say to that criminal, I want you to know I take your actions personally. And the criminal says, no, you don't. Don't be silly. I insulted that person. I didn't insult your person. So don't talk nonsense. Well, is the criminal right or are you right? You're right, because when you identify with someone, what happens to that person also happens to you. These are examples of how you can become, so to speak, invested in another person, and then what that happens to that person becomes part of your personal history. So, now this is step one, where I have a problem, and it took me a while to get beyond the problem. Step one is, if I invest in that person, I see myself in that person, and because I love myself in that person, and of course, since it's in that person, it's going to affect how I relate to that person. This, more or less, fits the words that Rav Dessler said. When you invest in another person, you love yourself in that person. But, maybe this has occurred to you already, occurred to me when I was learning this and teaching this, this sounds a little bit like colonialism. So the person says, I love America. How about Puerto Rico? Oh, well, Puerto Rico is an American colony, I guess you could call it. And so it's part of America, of course. Not legally a state like other states, but still, it's American. So of course I love it because that's America. So then isn't this picture so far in Rav Dessler sort of like colonizing other people? I don't live just here, I live with my children because I invested in them and part of me is in them, so they're an extension of me. They're my children and they're my colonies and they're somehow, vassals, my vassals of the world. This doesn't sound like escaping egoism, does it? It's just that I'm bigger now. I have more. I'm more powerful. I'm richer. I have a bigger presence in the world. Wasn't loving your friend like yourself supposed to escape being ego-focused? Ego-involved? Wasn't it supposed to bring the bridge to the other person? What kind of bridge is it to the other person if I colonize the other person and make it my colony? Well, okay, fine, but that certainly doesn't reduce my self-investedness, my self-interestedness in the sense that would broaden my morality and my spirituality. So I couldn't figure out what Rav Dessler was saying. And by the way, that is the way of Jewish scholarship. Not, well, of course he's wrong then, he made a stupid mistake, which you could find a lot of people say, but that's just dumb. And here's the answer. The answer is, my question comes from ignoring what he said. My picture is, I am really here. I'm just this. And those things are my possessions, where the me is this, inside this skin, inside this body, limited to this place. But this picture is where the old I dissolves. It's a mistake to think of the I as disconnected. On the contrary, if part of me is in him, then the I that is me includes him. So he's not a possession of mine. The I now is shared between me and him. Then the I that's interested in itself includes him as part of the I. It's not a colony, not a possession, not a projection or an extension. The old boundary of the I dissolves. This is a much more profound idea. That relate to the other person by seeing that you share the self-interested I. When you have a love relationship, and the hope is that in marriage you have a relationship like this, you see the world through four eyes. You see the world through your eyes, and you see the world through your spouse's eyes, and the concern is the concern for what you see. I'll think of his name. He went to the wife with his doctor, and the doctor said, "What's the problem?" And he said, "Our foot hurts." Yeah, that's it. It's our foot. It's on that body, it's on this body, it's our foot. And it hurts. That's the consciousness that we're talking about. So it really is self-love, but absorbed outwards, so the self changes. The self becomes a kind of collective. And in a loving marriage, that definitely happens. There's no question about it. And it can happen in friendship, and it can happen with groups that you identify with and you share with. It can happen when it happens through the idea of investment. So that's the idea that he's describing. One way he puts it is this. We typically think that we do for people whom we love. He said that in addition, and perhaps more fundamentally, we love those for whom we do. It's by doing for the other person that you come to extend your identity to that person and thereby share a concern that embraces the both of you. So this would mean that the way that you come to love other people and fulfill that verse is to love, is to invest in them. Now, there's an obvious objection to the idea at this point, really, but the verse says to love your friends, which typically includes a vast section of the Jewish people. Maybe not everybody qualifies to be a friend, but it doesn't mean your personal friend. It doesn't mean friends that you know. It means loving Jews. How are you going to invest in them? So let me tell you a story, and then perhaps a double story, which I think illustrates this very well. About 8 years ago, I think, there was a busload of high school girls from Brooklyn that went to Massachusetts to a forest area, and they were out in the forest all day, and one of the girls got lost. Oh, she got lost. Buses of volunteers came up from Brooklyn looking for her. Of course, people were calling each other, and people all over the world were praying for her. Now, there was a woman in Los Angeles who was a teacher, and the word came, this was like after 18 hours, that the girl was found. She got word in class, and she started to cry. I think the students were like, you took a telephone call and started crying? What happened? So she told them the story. So the student said, well, was this girl your cousin? Your niece? Why are you crying? And she said, she was a Jewish girl, and she was lost. And I was worried about her. And now she was found. So I'm overwhelmed with relief. So it seems clear that it is possible to have this kind of identification, this kind of love with people whom you don't even know. So I was in Denver, it was 10 years ago or more. I was happily teaching at one point in time. I taught a women's group, and one of the women said, well, how do you get to that? How do you invest? Where do you invest in that? And I said, it's a good question. How do you invest in strangers? I'll think about it. And it took me a few months. I realized that's what prayer does. When you pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so you look at the text of the prayers, all the prayers are in the plural. Please do for the Jewish people. If you have individual prayers, you're supposed to insert them under the topic of the particular blessing that you're saying. But it's always, the Jewish people need X. I'm also Jewish, and I also need X, so I'm putting my name in also. But the focus is on the Jewish people. Now, prayer is an attempt to make something happen. Because when the Kodesh Baruch Hu decides what to do in the world, one of the things he takes into account is prayer. So when you pray for something, you're adding a feature which could have an effect on the outcome of the decision. So when we were thinking of the Jews in the Soviet Union, of Chris's memory, who were being victimized by the Soviets, and we're praying for them, what we had in mind is, please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, help them. And in doing that, I'm trying to help them. I'm really investing in helping them. So in prayer, when you address prayer to the Creator on behalf of the Jewish people as a whole, you're really doing something active to improve the condition of the Jewish people in the whole. You're making an investment in them. And since you're making that investment in them, then you've projected part of yourself into them, and then yourself dissolves into a corporate entity, a corporate identity, and then the corporate identity treats all parts of the self as equally parts of the self, as it should. And that way you can come to love other Jews, even if you don't know them personally, but you can make an investment in them without knowing them personally. Now, in everybody's life, I imagine, there are people for whom this commandment is very challenging. Yeah, Rabbi, okay, but you don't know Ralph. Ralph is a funny guy. Ralph's a tough guy. He's got problems. I'm not the only one who has problems. Other people have problems, but there's also, it's just not practical, Rabbi, to ask me to love Ralph. I'm not talking about a vicious criminal here. It might be you don't have to love him. Certain types of vicious criminals aren't called your friend. Re'ach haba mitzvah, say Chazal. It's got to be someone who's committed to the commandments of the Torah and so forth and so on. But there are people who are committed to the commandments and are still difficult people. They have problems, they have shortcomings like we all do. And they're difficult people to love. So how do you manage to overcome that natural repulsion when you're dealing with such a person? So there are two factors to take into account. One is what Rav Dessler said, but I'll come to that second. And the other is to somehow minimize the repulsion. I saw this with my own eyes, and then recently I heard a footnote to it. I saw this 50 years ago. My Rebbe Zatzal, the Boston Rebbe, this was in Boston, when I was in Boston. We were there for the morning prayers, chakras, and after the prayers were over, someone, who I also know well, came in and started yelling at the Rebbe in public. Berating him and yelling. I was distraught. I stepped in between them, forced myself in between, facing the other fellow, and I pushed him out the door. Came back to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was totally calm. Totally calm. I said to the Rebbe, how do you do that? I mean, if there's a secret, I want to know it. You weren't moved by it at all. And he said these words, I know what's going on at home. Oh, something's going on at home. Aha. This guy isn't just mean. This guy isn't just disregarding of other people's feelings. No, he's suffering. He's suffering. And that's where his bitter behavior comes from. Doesn't that change your attitude towards the person? Instead of animosity, instead of aggravation, instead of irritation, you feel pity. Imagine what he's going through to cause him to behave that way. Now, Rabbi Nachman says, that was a special case, but the Rebbe happened to know. When someone irritates you, do you know what's going on at home? Probably not. So the first thing you could say is, maybe something's going on at home. In fact, my life experience has taught me, almost without exception, if someone causes pain knowingly to somebody else, it's because he's in pain. Otherwise, why would he cause pain to somebody else? What would he get out of it? What would the purpose of it be? A person has a happy, satisfactory life. He spends his day thanking Kodesh Baruch Hu for all the things that he gave him. Why would he want to hurt somebody else? So there's a presumption that he's suffering some kind of pain. And that way you can reduce the natural repulsion that you have for such a person. There's a rabbi involved in Yeshivat Torah, Dovid Pliskin, for whom I've learned a considerable amount. I heard a story about him from my Rebbe who saw this happen. And we're on the street in Yerushalayim, and there was a man, I don't know whether he was physically hitting his son or yelling at his son, but really treating his son with a harshness and cruelty that was inappropriate. Rabbi Pliskin walked up to him and said, you know something? I have children also. Children can be very hard to deal with, can't they? It's really sometimes very hard. But you know what? I could help you. I could help you make it better. He happens to be a psychologist. And he gave him his card and says, if you want help, think what he did. He met him where he is. He's frustrated and angry at his child. Rabbi Pliskin is, first of all, in a certain sense, validating him. They can push you. They know how to push you. They're programmed to be able to know how to push you from day one. So he's saying, I'm not condemning you. I'm not discarding you. But there are better ways to handle it, and I could help you. That's a brilliant thing to do. That way, you're treating the person as a victim rather than as a criminal, and that enables you to want to bridge to the other person. The other thing to do is to do anything that could make his life better. Anything. Well, anything that's licit, anything that's not forbidden by some law or value. And most people have areas in which you could do something to make their lives better, like saying hello with a friendly face. Hello, how are you? There's a famous story of someone who was on his way to jump off a bridge. And somebody stops and said, hello, how are you? And he changed his mind. So you think, here's this person, let's say it's not a one-time thing, he's a colleague at work, or he's a person in your social circle or whatever, and you think, nothing dramatic. What's one thing that I could do in the space of 15 seconds to make him feel better? If you do that, you will feel differently about him. You won't feel the same animosity. You won't feel the same irritation. If you make a point of doing that regularly, you will build a bridge. So this is taking Rav Dessler's thought in minimum and using it even to that extent. It will build a bridge. Another type of obstacle that people talk about is this: you're involved in a relationship. It could be a sibling, it could be a child or a parent, and you do show love, and you want to show love, but there's no reciprocity. In romantic relationships, they talk about unrequited love, and that's supposed to be terrible, and to a certain extent, it is a terrible situation where A loves B and B doesn't love A. Here, the person doesn't respond to your investments, and usually what reinforces your motivation is that you see some difference, or you see the person change, and sometimes the person shows gratitude, and here you're not getting it. Yes, that's very tough. But I'll give you another way to think about it, which might make it less tough. I don't know if you probably have had arguments with people. And sometimes you have an argument, the other person says, you're wrong, you're definitely wrong, you're stupid for having said that, and so on and so on. He walks away. Did you accomplish anything? Maybe you did. Maybe he just says that because he doesn't want to admit that you're really getting to him, actually. He doesn't want to admit it to you. He doesn't want to lose face in the confrontation, especially in public. Don't assume that what you did had no effect. Let it stew. It might take a while. When I first came here in 1981, there was a student here, reasonably bright, quiet, reserved, rarely making a comment, and the comment was always critical. He was here for 3 months and left. No contact, there's no email in those days, nothing. We didn't write letters. Right? I left him. 14 years later, I was in Los Angeles giving a lecture. After the lecture, he comes up and says, "Hi, do you remember me?" I said, "Nope." "I'm that one from 14 years ago." "What happened to you?" "He's wearing a black hat, he's got a black suit. He looks like he's joined the tribe. What happened?" He said, "I'll tell you. I thought about what you said for 7 years. In the meantime, you went to Yale and got a degree. And after 7 years, I decided you were right." And then he moved to Passaic, and he married, and he has a family. He's there on business, so he thought he would just say hello. Boy, was I surprised. I couldn't believe it. We had one other case I'll tell you about. We had a boy here who had finished his degree at Harvard, and he was on his round-the-world trip, only, unlike everybody else, he went east instead of west. He ended up here in the summertime, and he came in. He was referred here. Someone in Thailand said, "Oh, you're going to Jerusalem? Go to yeshiva." Okay. He had hair down to his shoulder blades. He was tall, strong, good-looking, and boy, did he have ADHD. He couldn't sit still for more than 2 days. He'd be here for 2 or 3 days, and he snuck into Jordan. He'd be here for 2 or 3 days. He went to Egypt, then he went to Cyprus. He was running around everywhere. He was here for about 7 weeks, and then he left. We looked at each other and said, least likely to succeed. You can put him in that page of the yearbook, least likely to succeed. Well, he went to Berkeley Law School. And then, lo and behold, his 3rd year of Berkeley Law School, where he could have been on the law review, he chose to spend it here in the yeshiva, doing law exams at the Hebrew University, and that way finishing his law degree. He walked in. We couldn't believe it. He made it. Yeah, he made it. He hooked up with some religious Jews in Berkeley, and he did more exploration, and he became a lawyer, and he married a woman who was a Baal Shuva, who was a professor of English, and they founded a family. So don't assume when you have a painful interaction with somebody and the person shows no effect of what you do, don't assume that there's no effect. Don't assume that. I have to look this up to see the exact reference, but some of the Tzaddik quotes in the prophets that the prophet is berating, criticizing the population he's speaking to, and it describes the quality of that population, its crimes, with a long string of adjectives. And after he finishes speaking, you have a long string of adjectives, -1. -1. And says the Pri Tzaddik, it's -1 because the speaking of the prophet to them had an effect. You might not see it, might not be visible to you, but it had an effect. So when you invest in someone, think in your mind, it's natural and it's probable that I am having an effect, even though I don't see it. You'll need this when you have children because your 8-month-old won't be able to respond to you in the way that you want, to give you reinforcement, probably. And yet, you will need to interact with the 8-month-old in ways that will be developmental. And you know rationally, well, the child's 8-month-old, so what I'm doing now is building the child's future, even though you don't immediately have the feedback. And you may go through, eventually, the kind of unhappy outcome, temporary outcome. I would live through this with my friends when I went to university. Your parents invest so much in you, they care about you, they want you to succeed. They send you to university, and university teaches you that your parents are trash. They don't understand anything, they don't have the right politics, they have the wrong values, and they're trash. And you're 19 and you know everything. You've learned it, you're already your sophomore year of college, you are really riding high. You come home and you spit on your parents and you treat them with disrespect. The wise parent says when he's 25 he'll feel different. And many do. Not everyone makes it. Some people remain 17 until they're 60. But usually, after a little more life experience, as Mark Twain said, when I was 17, I was embarrassed by how little my father understood. And when I was 21, I was amazed at how much he learned in 4 years. Got it, right? He didn't learn it in 4 years. When he was 21, he understood better how much his father knew when he was 17. That's Mark Twain's humor. So, even if there's no reinforcement, you can reinforce yourself with the knowledge that it's very likely it's having an effect. And it may be a delayed effect, and the person may be embarrassed to explain it to you, to share it with me, but it's having an effect. And finally, one of the skills in making an investment in another person, we spoke this about some of us when we did this a few days ago, is a way of making an investment in another person where he doesn't know you're doing it. How is that? One of the things that strengthens people, one of the things that builds self-esteem is when a person can do something for somebody else. I know, I wrote an article once on self-esteem, and I researched this all over the world, and I didn't find anybody who understood this simple point. They'll tell you self-esteem is when you compliment the person and don't criticize the person and give him jobs that are very easy, so you make sure that he's successful and protect him from failure and give him support and all the rest of that. Some of that may be helpful. But let me give you a story that I saw written up. A woman writes that before Pesach and all the cleaning and preparing for Pesach, and she said to her 8-year-old son, Yankee, the bookcases are yours. Take everything down, clean them, polish them, dust the books, and put them back. Well, it takes a ladder to climb up, and it's a project. Came the night of the Seder, they're sitting there at the Seder with 25 people, and the mother says to the people, you see those bookcases? You see how they're gleaming? Yankee did that. How does he feel? He feels terrific, because he did something that other people appreciate. It's something that they feel made their lives a little better. And he was the author of it. That's how you build self-esteem. Enable people to be helpful and valuable to other people, and that's where you feel your value. Okay, so if that's the case, suppose you know someone who has a self-esteem problem. One thing you could do to invest in him is to ask him for help. Why? How does it work? I'll just go into a tiny more detail. Let's suppose, the example that I gave a few days ago, I'm going to a trip to Italy. I've never been there before, and he's been there several times. I said to him, Ruvain, you've been there several times. I'm going for the first time. Tell me, what's it like? What should I take? Where should I go? What are the people like? And he tells me. What am I communicating to him when I ask him? This is what Deborah Tannen would call the meta message. The meta message is, I think you're intelligent, I think you're experienced, I think you're articulate, you can communicate well, otherwise I wouldn't ask you. I think you're generous enough to spend your time and share your experience with me. Isn't that a vote of confidence in him? I think so highly of him. I think so well of him. Doesn't he then become more in his own eyes? Now here, I'm really getting information. So he's really benefiting me. But that's not my total motivation. My total motivation is to enable him to give to me and thereby feel more deeply his own worth. In this way, I'm investing in him and he doesn't know I'm investing in him. Which means my investment in him doesn't cause him a debt of gratitude. That's an exquisite gift to give someone. And that's not so hard to do. It's not so hard to do. By the way, as Dale Carnegie wrote, what is the one subject that every person in the world is most happy to talk about? Himself. So if you ask a person questions about himself, show interest in him. As he said, I went into a CEO of a big company, and I was supposed to sell him furniture. And I saw a picture of fishing on the wall. Said to him, are you a fisherman? Yes. Where do you go? What kind of flies do you use? What do you do with the fish that you catch? Where else could you go? Time went by. The secretary said you could have 5 minutes. He said, oh, it's time to lunch. Let's go to lunch. You came here for furniture, didn't you? Let's talk about that. For 3 hours went by, and the guy didn't even know it because he was talking about himself. Ask this person, who is a difficult person, who is irritating, show interest in him. How are you doing? Where did you go last summer? How was it? Did you enjoy it? Just showing interest in someone. That in itself can be a tremendous gift to that person. He doesn't hear it as a gift, unless he's very sophisticated and trained in some kind of psychology. He just hears, you want to know about me? I'm happy to tell you about me. So these are ways that you can reach people and invest in them, and in that way, you will come to care about them. You will come to feel that your self has spread to encompass them as well. Now, Rav Dessler says that this applies also in your relationship to God. I'll just mention 2 words about this, because it's a much more abstract subject. So let's see. The way that you develop love is to invest. So investing in the Creator? Isn't that a bit bold? Does the Creator need our investments? Aren't we taught that He's perfect and He's complete and so forth and so on? The short answer, which could fill volumes, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to us on two different levels simultaneously. There's a level in which he's complete, self-sufficient, perfect, transcendent, and all the rest. But in addition to that, he projects for us an image of himself, and he wants us to live with that image also. And that image is, he created the world, he created it for a purpose, and he's inviting us to a partnership in fulfilling the purpose for which he created the world. So now, when I act in such a way as to move his purpose forward, I'm doing something for him. In terms of this picture, which he has projected for us to use. He wants us to use it together with knowing your top picture. Yes, have a split mind. You learn to do that in physics. So, you're investing in his project. And by doing that, you are called a chassid. Chassid means someone who practices chesed, which is loving kindness, practitioner of loving kindness. And the Talmud says, Ezu chassid, who is a practitioner of loving kindness? Hamas chasedim kono, someone who does loving kindness to his creator. You can only do loving kindness when you do something valuable to the person you're doing it for. Otherwise, it's not loving kindness at all. So even with respect to Kadosh Baruch Hu, when you do something in his name, when you do something because you want his project to move forward on a higher level, you do it out of love for him, that in itself is, from our point of view, an investment in him, and that can lead you to have love for Kadosh Baruch Hu in the same dynamic, because now the I that I experience includes a Kadosh Baruch Hu also. And that, in a way, is the highest dimension of I, the realistic dimension of I, that a person can achieve. That's a very brief summary. It's an essay on loving kindness, Rav Nestler. If you have a chance to read it, I highly recommend it. That's it.